course, because we're in a magical place, I couldn't resist but to add just a little bit of magic to some of my slides as well, and you'll find that sprinkled about the presentation. No Mickey ears on all of my photos, sadly. I didn't quite have time for that, but I'm curious. I've met a lot of great new people here at the conference, and I'm interested, show of hands, how many of you have gotten a chance to meet someone new here as well? All right, excellent. All those bingo cards are working well. And conferences, places like this, great places to meet new people, to start relationships with industry peers and potential future colleagues. And it's estimated that we'll each meet around 10,000 people in our lifetimes. And with each of those meetings as well comes the chance to form a lasting relationship. And it's why we as a society put so much emphasis on the need to make a good first impression, a good introduction. Now, earlier in my career, when I was more focused on narrative storytelling, I actually struggled with my first impressions, my introductions. I used to create stories and comics and animations, as you can see here from this pile of stuff my mother saved from my childhood. It was an industry that I was so certain I was going to be a part of. And yet every time I would start a new project, I would immediately get stuck because I could never feel like I could craft a beginning, an introduction that appropriately engaged my audience in the story that I wanted them to be a part of. And so I would stop projects partway through just to go back and iterate over and over again on these introductions. But it wasn't until I moved into the world of interaction design, out of narrative storytelling, that I realized what the problem had been. It was that narrative storytelling was forcing me to tell a one-size-fits-all introduction to my audience, when in reality, a good introduction is built on the interplay between two or more entities. It's more like a conversation. Now, digital experiences and sites, they have to greet new people all the time. They're built around interactivity. So what happens if we take some of their common introductions and put them into a more conversational format? Well, we often find they still take a very narrative, one-sided approach. And these kinds of things have the results that you'd probably expect from that. I'm sure if you tried these on real people, it would feel pretty awkward. Now, this is a session about your site's first impressions, your introductions, so I think it would be fitting to get you all involved in a really quick activity. I want each of you to think, what is the first thing your site says or does to greet a new user? I want you to bring that to the top of your mind. Because what we're going to do with that for about the next minute is I'm going to have you turn to a person sitting next to you, and I want you to greet them the same way that your site greets a new user. And we'll do that for about the next minute. All right? Go ahead, turn to that seat neighbor. All right, well, that loud gong sound does mean it is time to pull you back from that activity. I'm really excited to see you all super engaged with that because it can be an awkward proposition to turn to a live human being and greet them the same way that your site greets a new user. Now, show of hands, how many of you found yourself saying something like sign up, agree, subscribe, some kind of commitment? All right, we've got a few folks. How many of you found yourselves describing your site or your service in some way? All right, cool. And how many of you couldn't quite remember exactly how your site greets a new user, so maybe you made something up? All right, we've got a fair number. That's okay, that's why we're here today. We're here to look at how to make these experiences for new users just a bit better. And it's why the past few years I've focused my career on designing first-time experiences for new users. And I also collect and catalog and curate examples of first-time user experiences to inspire us all to do better by them in this point in time. Because what we have to remember is that by the time a new user has come to our site, they've already traversed a bit of a path. They're ready to get started and unwrap this gift that's going to bring them joy or solve a problem in their lives. And yet far too often what we do instead is we greet them with a series of screens describing our site, a video that they have to watch, or we just tell them to sign up and figure they'll find their own way through it later. And that's a shame, not just for these new users, but for us, because we fight to get new users.
We pour our blood, sweat, tears, our marketing dollars into acquiring them, and yet we struggle to retain them. We see high bounce rates, low retention after sign-up, and we know that we have a very limited opportunity during which to educate and engage these new users. So let's not waste it. Let's stop trying to tell people how they should experience our sites or hope that they figure it out for themselves, and instead invest in a good process of user onboarding. Now, user onboarding is a term borrowed from the human resources industry, and it describes a process by which a new employee is acclimated into a new company over time. And when done well in the workplace, it can actually increase employee retention and their engagement, their productivity. And the same is true for our digital experiences and our sites. A well-onboarded user will stick around for longer and will be more engaged with the features we've spent so much time building. So in this session, we'll be focused on 3 ways to better onboard our new users. The first of which is through guided interaction, the second being the use of free samples, and the third with a personal focus. Guided interaction, free samples, a personal focus. In each of these 3 sections, I'll be sharing patterns you can use on your site, examples of them in use on real sites, and a take-home activity you can do with your teams after you get back from the show. So let's dive in and get started with the first element of good onboarding, which is guided interaction. Now, as Eric mentioned, I go scuba diving, and I'm going to start this off with a short story about how I got certified to dive. When this photo was taken, I actually hadn't been certified yet. I had always perceived diving as a highly technical sport, and I knew some friends, being from the Bay Area, that had enrolled in a certification course and dropped out partway through because they said it was too dry and difficult. And that just kind of reinforced my perception of this being highly technical. However, a few years ago, I came across an opportunity to do something that was called a discovery dive. And it turned out that this would let me try diving without being certified. Well, I figured, how dangerous could it be if I could try it without going through a certification course, so I signed up. And the morning of my dive, I met an instructor down by the beach, and he taught me some basics: how to don gear, how to do some key hand signals underwater, and how not to hold my breath while I was diving. And from there, he escorted me into the water. We went out to a reef, descended to a relatively safe depth, and as he guided me around, I got to spend my first time diving ogling loads of cool fish. Very inspirational. So as I got out of the water, I signed up for a certification course to ensure I could keep doing this. And that's when I was greeted with how a certification course actually starts, which is with stuff like this: bookwork. You have to learn dive physics, memorize some of these wonderful pressure tables. After this, then you get the pleasure of doing a lot of skills training in a swimming pool. And only after that do they let you go into the ocean to do your final checkout dives. Now, because I had my prior context for my discovery dive, I made it through some of these more dry and difficult parts of the course, and I had that motivation at the end of the tunnel, my light at the end of the tunnel, guiding me through. But it was clear to me why my friends hadn't made it through certification, right? This was their first exposure to diving. So when we're forcing users to read the manuals of our sites, our descriptions, our videos, our slideshows, we're being too restrictive. We're not just letting them get into the water. However, we don't want to just toss people into the deep end with no hope of survival. Instead, we want to provide them with just the right amount of guidance so that they can get immersed in our authentic experiences, have realistic context, but also a safe and successful time of doing it. This concept of guiding someone as they use our experience is based on an educational construct known as scaffolded instruction, by which you introduce a new person into a new space, increase your support for them as they get immersed in more complex tasks, and then decrease that support as they become expert. Good guidance, it will facilitate that exploration in an authentic space. It will gradually engage the new user, and it will provide them with clear and actionable next steps. So let's take a look at 3 patterns for guided interaction that we can use on our sites. The first of these patterns is the easiest to implement. They're called inline cues, and it's when you weave guidance into the flow of surrounding content for a more seamless experience. Here's an example at a very simple level of an inline cue from the blog post website medium.com. Here, a user has scrolled past a certain number of posts, and they see this inline cue inserted at an interval. It guides them to featured tags as well as top stories, and while it doesn't look like an explicit bit of guidance, it's giving this user a clear sense of where they can go next in the experience. And similarly, it can be useful on other content browsing sites, like this example from Polyvore. Here, a user has scrolled past a certain number of search results for a clothing item, and they see this inline cue guiding them to related or advanced filters for that search. Now, because inline cues are embedded within the structure of your existing content, they're also great when you have empty states. We see an example of that here in Google Keep, which is a note-taking website. Now, a new user has entered Keep for the first time. And instead of being greeted with a blank screen saying, hey, create a note, they're greeted with 4 starter notes. Each of these notes demonstrate the type of content you can create and keep, but they are each completely editable. You can go in, overwrite the sample content that they have provided, and make it your own, so you're never really starting from scratch. And we see here yet another example of an inline cue being used for Jet.com's empty shopping cart. Again, it's not empty, not saying, hey, go find items and fill me with them. It's giving them links to their top categories so they can start shopping right away. And even as the users start shopping, you can see that the empty shopping cart remains docked on the right-hand side, continuing to guide them even as they add more items, and with a successful animation when they finally hit their free shipping threshold. So inline cues great for these content browsing experiences or education when you have empty states. But sometimes, like hinted at here in the Jet.com example, you want to guide someone as they go through a more involved task. And that's where you can use the second pattern for guided interaction called the user-guided tutorial. This is when we provide temporary guidance, usually in the form of hints, for the first time a user goes through a task, and it's responsive to their chosen path through that activity. Here's an example of a user-guided tutorial on marvel.com, which is a prototyping website. Here, a new user has created her first project and uploaded her first set of screens, and she wants to create a clickable prototype with them. So she's greeted the first time in with a one-time hint, encouraging her to click on one of those screens. When she does, she's greeted with a follow-up hint, guiding her to create her first hotspot. And if she does that, she'll get yet another hint, encouraging her to create a transition between that screen and another. If she had gone through this flow in a different order, it would have been shown in a different order. So these hints, again, are showing up in response to her chosen path through the experience. We see a different example of a user-guided tutorial here from Bonsai, which is a website that helps freelance designers create contracts for their work. Now, here Bonsai can provide a lot of information to try and help people calculate the numbers that are best for each field in a contract. But instead of presenting that all at once up front, it just reveals it as the user clicks on certain fields. Very lightweight guidance, but again, responsive to the user's chosen path through this task. So user-guided tutorials, again, great for those task-based education needs. Now there is a third pattern for guided interaction, which is called the playthrough pattern. It's less common on websites, but good to know about if you're building something with a new interaction model. A playthrough is when you provide an authentic, protected space ahead of your full site or product experience in which someone can learn and practice core skills. Now, this pattern has its roots in the gaming industry, and we'll see an example here from the game Plants vs. Zombies. Show of hands who've played this game in some form. Excellent. Fun game. Definitely check it out if you haven't. Now, what this game does is it invites new players to participate in a playthrough tutorial. And if they agree to do that, they'll be greeted with a series of levels that are structured like any other levels in the game. Yet, it comes with an additional layer of guidance, non-blocking, and it focuses on teaching them core skills like how to grow plants, how to collect sun in order to grow additional plants, and ultimately how to use a group of plants to defend your home from a horde of very hungry zombies. All the basics that you need to know to have success in the more chaotic game world that awaits. And if you're interested particularly in the design process behind Plants vs. Zombies, there's a great talk given by George Fan that you can look up, How I Got My Mom to Play Through Plants vs. Zombies, that goes more in depth on how they designed this flow. Now, this is not just limited to games. The playthrough can be put to work for us, for our digital experiences. And we see a pretty good example here from the folks that created the Mayo armband. Now, Mayo armband, band that you wear on your arm, it senses your muscle movements, allowing you to gesture control your laptop or your desktop. Now, this is an abstract interaction model. So what they do before they let people start flailing around with their hands in their apps is they introduce them to the concepts through a playthrough tutorial. First, they teach them gestures in a very linear order, and they support it with video guidance. So you practice these, you get it right in this order, and once you've shown you can do that correctly, then they let you practice in any order you'd like, and they subtract that video guidance. Then, after you've gotten your fill of practicing all these, making sure that you have it correct, they'll show you how to combine gestures to control sample applications, giving you a sense for how this applies in the real world. And it ends with a list of the apps that you can start using right away with the gestures that you just learned. So the playthrough tutorial is best when you have these brand new interaction models, or you need people to learn critical core skills before they can have success in your experience. The user-guided tutorial is great for task instruction or guidance sprinkled across many screens. And inline cues are great for supplemental education, education within content browsing experiences, as well as empty state guidance. And to recap, right, that good guidance, it will facilitate exploration in an authentic space, it will gradually engage that new user, and it will provide them with actionable next steps. But also important to note, good guidance knows when to not overdo it. We don't have to be a certain paperclip about things when it comes to our guided interaction. We want to avoid wasting the user's time on things that are really obvious learnings, or to teach them about things we couldn't polish in our product before we shipped. We want to avoid blocking the user's immersion in our authentic context with modals or takeover animations, anything of that like. We want to avoid repeating things that someone has already learned or chosen to ignore, and we should allow escape. To borrow another gaming term, some people are just button mashers, right? They just want to learn through trial and error. And so unless your experience is incredibly destructive, which I really hope it's not, you should allow them the means to skip and try things for themselves. So at this point, you've seen a number of patterns for guided interaction, you've seen some sites that use them, and you may be wondering, well, what's the right amount of this for my experience? And for that, I've put together a take-home exercise you can do with your team that doesn't require much to prepare for, so that you can start taking the next steps in this area when you get home. It's called What's Your Coaching Cadence? And it is able to be run as an audit on your existing onboarding experience, or you can use it to try out concepts for a new one. All you need for this activity is a large writing space, a large whiteboard or a sheet of butcher paper, and you're going to draw a line horizontally across that space. Now the top row above that line is going to represent your site, and the bottom row is going to represent your new user. And going from left to right, you're going to start plotting out the interaction between your site and a new user. If information is being exchanged. For example, I like to just represent that with speech bubbles, so information being text or images. And similarly, if I'm asking for something from the user, they're giving me information back, again, as speech bubbles. Then if actions are taking place, I like to represent those and differentiate them with diamond shapes, because what this allows you to do is see the balance between what you're telling or showing new users and what they're able to actually interact with. And then the next step is to connect these with a line, because what you get from this is a sense of the overall cadence of what you're doing for new users in their onboarding experience. So if the product is saying or showing a lot before the user can jump in and do anything, you might be a little too product overweighted. If the user has to flail about before you jump in to help them, you might be a little too user overweighted. And overcoaching may come across as a crazy zigzag pattern. However, every site is different. Your mileage may vary with this, which is why the real benefit in plotting this out comes from acting it out. Much like we did at the beginning of this session, get your team in a room and have someone play the role of your site and someone play the role of your new user and start acting out what you've plotted out. You can put things on Post-its so you can move them around, because you'll immediately get a feel for awkward feeling guidance elements, for things that feel like it's lacking information or is providing too much. And so you can move these around, and through cheap prototyping in this format, you can even take it into the lab to do some testing with your users. If you invite your users in and you get them to participate in this activity, you get a real sense of what is going to work and what isn't, just from these cheap materials here on paper. And this will give you kind of the overall breadth of what your onboarding experience could be. And from here, you're going to want to dive into more detailed prototyping to validate. Most of the patterns and examples I shared earlier can be done using the tools that you're already using today. But if you're particularly interested in trying to get started with some of those user-guided tutorial hints, there are a couple of tools you can use to prototype. One is a simple JavaScript library called Hopscotch. It has an element called lightweight callouts so that you can start playing with the concept of triggering hints based on individual user events. And if you don't want to dig into JavaScript, you just want something a little bit more WYSIWYG, there is a product called App Queues. It allows you to create a dashboard of different user contexts and trigger hints based on those contexts. And it will also tie into your analytics dashboard, so again, you can do some real-time validation. And I just want to emphasize that these are definitely prototyping tools. Your final versions of your onboarding experience, you'll definitely want to build in your tools that are right for your site. Now, as you get into the details of implementation, you may lose a sense of that conversation you spent so much time building for initially. So here are some tips on how to keep a sense of that conversation going. You don't lose an idea of that dialogue with your new user. You can, if you have mock-ups or sketches pinned up, again, attach those kind of Post-its with speech bubbles attached to them. If you're already implementing some stuff, embed in your comments things like a dialogue or a script, as if you were writing a movie script. Put that into your code, strip it out before you launch. But again, this gives you a sense of that dialogue between your site and the user. And this is also a great opportunity to put those accessibility tools to work for you. Turn on your screen readers. If you're hearing how your site is greeting a new user, that's really just going to make you feel those improvement areas even more effectively. If you didn't happen to capture all the details of how to run that exercise with your team, no worries. I've created a free template for you that you can download and take home, use with your teams and modify. It's found at kryshiggins.com/coach, and you can also grab it from the speaker materials on the Event Apart site as well. So with guided interaction, we immerse our new users into our authentic experiences so that they have context as we layer on guidance. But in order to truly get them involved and engaged with our experience into the first place, we need to embrace the second element of good onboarding, which is the use of free samples. Now, this section, I'll start off with another story, but this one's going to be about a time I made a pretty bad mistake. You see, when I graduated from college, I was desperate. I'd graduated into a terrible job market, and I was moving to California with a very small amount in a savings account and kind of the clothes on my back. And through some miracle, I had found a friend who had lined up a job interview, just one job interview, for a few days after I was to arrive in the state. But where I was interviewing at and where I was able to stay were separated by about 30 miles. I needed a car, and I needed it fast. So naturally, I jumped on a Craigslist, and I looked for any vehicle in my area within my very meager price range. And I found one, a Pontiac Grand Am, being sold by someone who just mysteriously said they needed to sell it ASAP. That was red flag number one. I ignored it. I went ahead. I contacted this seller, and we met at a local shopping mall. And then I ignored two other red flags. The reason she was selling the car ASAP was that she was leaving the country. She didn't give me any details on why. She was just leaving the country. And then the third red flag was that I was only allowed to give this car a visual inspection. No test drive. She was in a rush. That really should have tipped things for me, but I ignored it. Like I said, I was desperate. So I agreed to those terms. I looked at the car. Looked good to me. I didn't know what a poor car would look like. And I wrote this woman a check for about 75% of my savings account. And I took ownership of a vehicle that later became jokingly referred to by my friends and I as the Pontiac Grand Scam. Because this car, it was a disaster. There was some miracle it got me to the interview, but a few days after that, the entire braking system needed to be replaced. Not too long after that, I was sitting in a parking garage and white smoke began billowing out of the heating vents. Something called the heater core had gone bad. And then not too long after that, it blew a gasket. Now, while this car taught me a lot about car maintenance, the innards of a car, and which friends could be depended upon to make cheap repairs, you better believe that when I saved up enough to buy a new car, that I put that one through the ringer. Right? I did so many test drives. I wouldn't believe anything anyone told me about the vehicle. I had to build up a lot of trust before I would purchase it. And this is true of so many people, right? We've either heard of others who've been scammed, or we've been scammed ourselves, and we don't ever want to repeat that. It's why car dealerships put so much emphasis on getting you to do the test drive. It's why stores would never expect us to buy something sight unseen. Yet, every time we force new users to sign in or sign up before they can use our site or our product, we're expecting them to do just that. Forcing someone to sign up too soon in an experience can cause over half of them to immediately leave a site. More than 80% of them to lie on sign-up forms just to get by them. This is an example of a guy who was legitimately trying to create an account on a site and discovered that someone else had already created a fake account using his email address under the name of Boobs. People will do anything to get by these forms as quickly as possible, especially when they are provided out of context. However, 60% of people would give more information truthfully if they simply knew how it would be used. And the best way to demonstrate our value proposition is to allow people to try it for themselves, to try before they make that commitment. This will establish trust. It will set a positive initial tone in our experience, and it can also trigger something known as reciprocity, which is a perceived social obligation to return favors. In the 1970s, a professor of psychology, Philip Koons, decided to test out reciprocity for himself. He selected over 500 names, random strangers, from a phone book, and he mailed them all Christmas cards. And he received over 100 cards back from these strangers, some including photos of family members and pets, all because they felt this need to return this stranger's favor. In a more famous study published in the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, researchers wanted to test the effect that giving mints out with a check at the end of a meal had on how much was left in tips. So they had a control group. They received their check at the end of a meal, no mints provided, and they had a test group that received mints with their check. And the group that received mints gave 3% more in tips over the control group. So even the smallest gesture of goodwill, when given to somebody before we expect something back from them, can have a measurable, often beneficial effect for us. And this can be distilled into a pattern that we can use on our sites called the free sample pattern. This is when you allow new users to interact with a portion of your value proposition before you require them to create an account. Because here I mean free not from making payments, I mean free from the need to provide your information, because information is a form of currency. Let's look at some examples of sites and products that use different types of free samples. This first example comes from the University College application website. Here, new users, students generally, come to apply to many schools at once by filling out a single application. Now, unlike many other sites in this space, UCA doesn't require students to create an account before they can start downloading forms. They can start downloading all these forms, which builds trust that UCA has the tools that they need to have the greatest chance of success and allows them to prepare in advance of getting into the details of an application process. Here's another example. This one is from the financial investment site Wealthfront. Here, new users are not required to start creating an account right off the bat. Instead, they're greeted with a couple of questions, general questions aimed at figuring out their risk tolerance and their investment goals. After they answer these, Wealthfront creates for them a recommended dashboard of funds. Completely interactive, you can go in, research the details of each fund recommended for you, you can change your risk tolerance. This is almost equivalent to what an existing user would see, but just presented to you as a way to look at what Wealthfront offers. And from here, you can go decide to create that account if you'd like. Or you can click Save Your Plan. This allows you to put in your email address, and Wealthfront will send you a link to a unique URL from which you can pick up sign up at any time later on in the future when you're a bit more comfortable. There's also Duolingo, a language learning website, which also does not require users to create an account to start taking lessons. They can pick the language of their choice and start learning it. And while Duolingo does encourage you to create an account, by allowing you to try out some of the lessons before you do so, it makes sure for you that Duolingo's teaching style matches your learning needs. And finally, any e-commerce site that leverages guest checkout is using a form of a free sample. Show of hands, who has read Jared Spool's The $300 Million Button? Oh, okay. If you haven't read it, definitely take a read through it. It's a great example and a case study of the importance of guest checkout. In this case study, Jared and his team was working with an e-commerce company to try and reduce friction in their checkout flow. And they found that a huge point of friction was the fact that people were required to either sign up or sign in order to purchase an item. So a lot of people dropped out of that flow, or they were creating accounts even if they already had an account because they didn't remember that they already had one. So they added a continuous guest option to the checkout flow. And a year after making that change, the company saw a $300 million increase in revenue because more people were able to check out. So again, free samples, when done the right way for our experience, can have a measurable beneficial impact for us. And there are so many options when it comes to these free sample experiences. Drafts, limited time trials, free checkout, or free downloads, guest checkout, many more. Right, that I'm always dismayed when someone tells me that they couldn't quite find one that works for their experience. So that's something I want to try and address a little bit here with another activity that's going to run in the background through the rest of this session. I'm going to ask for a bit more of your interaction. What I have are a couple of volunteers from the audience who are going to hand out these foam core boards. If you receive a foam core board, you'll see a Sharpie is attached, and it says the word free samples at the top. If you get one of these, I just want you to write down one idea for a free sample that would work for your site or a similar type of site. And then, as soon as you've written down your one idea, just hand the board to the person sitting next to you, and I want them to add another idea. And we will try to fill as much of these boards by the end of this session as possible. And after the session, I will take photos of them, post them online, and you'll know there's a shared resource that you've both contributed to and can come back to should you ever need to be inspired for this in the future. Right? So let's get those handed out, start writing down those ideas, and I will show you how this transitions into an activity that you can do with your teams when you get home. The activity that you can do with your teams is called, well, what's your free sample? Pretty clearly. And it starts very similarly to what we're doing here. Get your teams together in a room with Post-its or in a shared doc and start capturing as many ideas as you can for ideas for free samples for your site. And don't worry if some of them seem a little bit crazy or wild. Because the next step is about prioritizing them on a relevancy versus cost plot. Relevancy, the vertical axis, means that the higher up something is, it indicates how relevant it is to your value proposition. So if you're a financial company and someone's idea is free puppies, as cute as they are, they're going to score very low on that axis. And then the horizontal axis, cost, means that the further to the right something is, the more expensive it will be in terms of time, money, or resources to build. And you're looking for free sample ideas in the upper left because these are going to be highly relevant to allowing people to interact with your value proposition, but not prohibitively expensive to implement. And as you hone in on which of these is the right idea for your site, you need to then come up with a transition plan. When in this experience is going to be the right time to prompt someone to create an account, because now you're not going to do it right out of the gate. General good rule of thumb, prompt for that conversion after delivering some value. We can go back to Duolingo to see some good examples of this. They deliver a prompt to sign up after you've successfully completed a lesson, and there it's framed around saving your progress. However, if you've gone through their discussion forums, gotten some value from a long post, at the bottom it will show you a prompt framed around joining in the discussion. And as you get into the details of implementing again and starting to validate things, just make sure that you're measuring success on retention and engagement, not just number of signups. Number of signups is one of those superficial metrics, right? It can trick you into thinking that you're successful. However, as you saw from the beginning of this section, right, you may have a lot of people who are filling out your sign-up forms but not actually engaging any further because they filled it out with fake information. So you may see a dip in number of sign-ups because of your free sample experience, but the users who do sign up may be more informed and engaged after it. So make sure you're paying attention to all of these metrics, not just number of sign-ups. So with free samples, we allow people to try our value proposition before we expect a commitment from them, building a foundation of trust on which we can then layer guided interaction. But to truly then get people motivated, engaged enough to return time and time again, we need to leverage the third and final element of good onboarding, which is a personal focus. Now this section is not going to start with a story. This section is going to start with a quick game. I'm going to ask for one more bit of audience participation from you. What we have here is a caricature of Mr. Jeffrey Zeldman. Jeffrey, I hope you don't mind my version of you. And what I'm going to ask you all to do is raise your hand as soon as you find Jeffrey in the following scene. Time's up. Oh, yeah, what did I do there? There he was. He was hiding right back there, squeezed in there behind some ghosts. Well, I saw a few hands go up. You folks, congratulations, you are eagle-eyed. The rest of you, if you didn't raise your hands, don't feel bad. That was kind of on purpose. I was kind of a jerk here, because what did I do, right? I gave you like 20 seconds to find Jeffrey in this crazy mess of decoys and distractions. I threw in some speaker cameos just to also distract you. Might be a few others in here that I've even lost track of at this point. Now, while this might have been fun or frustrating for you, you may be wondering, why did I have you take part in that childish exercise? It's because it illustrates an important point I want to make about onboarding and a common pitfall that we often fall into, which is that we tend to bombard new users with everything we think that they should see, the features we've built, the content that we've curated, that we make it impossible for them to find the thing they could actually relate to, that they're looking for. Computer scientist Herbert Simon probably said it best when he said that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. When you overstimulate people with too much stuff, it actually has the opposite effect of causing them to disengage because they can't get anything out of all that information. However, we can drive their engagement and their attention with relevancy, right? The educational system has known this for a long time, that effective teaching involves acquiring relevant knowledge about your students. Because when you understand what your students' goals in lives are, then you can show them how what you're teaching them actually applies to their lives, and they'll be much more likely to stick with their curriculum as a result. Now, interestingly, in that study I mentioned earlier with the mints, there was a third group. Now, this third group, they also got mints with their check at the end of their meal, but before they paid, the waiter came back around to them with a bowl of mints and said, "I thought you might want some more mints." This sense that the waiter had their personal interests in mind had the greatest impact in the amount of gratuity left, increasing it 21% over the control group. So we want to learn about our users so that we can create relevant experiences and show that we care about their needs. There are two ways that we can learn about our new users when they come onto our site for the first time. The first way is we can learn about them explicitly. We just ask or request information from them. Or we can learn about them implicitly. We learn by inferring something based on their context. So let's look at a few examples of sites that leverage explicit and implicit learning in order to tailor experiences for their new users. This first example is a somewhat simplistic example of explicit learning done on the Bucknell University website. They invite their new users to customize their homepage and present them with a series of filters through which they can do that. They can turn off and on buckets of content. What this allows the new user to understand is that Bucknell cares about their interest in that content, and they will know that should they return to Bucknell's website, they can expect to see the content that they curated. Here's another example from Volunteer Match's website. They connect volunteers with opportunities in their area. They frame it around what the user cares about, explicitly asking what they care about, and implicitly, they've learned where the user is based on a rough IP address. So they've got some implicit learning there. So they ask, what do you care about in your region? And the user will know that when they enter a field or pick a category, they'll only be shown results based on their location. So again, much more relevant than if they had just been shown a long list of things. Another example from Wealthfront, that financial website, shows us purely implicit learning. Here, a user has landed on a special landing page after clicking a link from a review about Wealthfront on the financial review site NerdWallet. So when they land on this page, Wealthfront has made the decision to skip them over their homepage, information that they assume they already have gleaned from that review. The landing page reflects their entry point and has a tailored call to action. This idea of tailoring landing page content based on a referring source is one way to connect your user acquisition strategy with your onboarding one. Now, sometimes you may need to ask a series of questions or learn a couple of things at one time about your new users in order to customize their experience. And for that, you can use a pattern that's commonly referred to as a wizard. The wizard pattern tends to have its roots in device setup. There, it being a setup wizard, you go through a couple of steps to make your device functional. But it can also be useful in new user onboarding, when you can have the user actively participate in tailoring and customizing their experience through a couple of steps. Here's an example of a wizard approach from the website Havenly. It aims to connect homeowners with interior designers. So it asks them a couple of questions to pick their style tastes on a rating scale. They go through that a few times, and then they're asked to pick the stores they like to shop at. And those prior two sections of questions culminate into the creation of a mood board that the homeowner is asked to favorite at least 3 images from. And the results of that are used to connect the homeowner with an interior designer that shares their aesthetic as closely as possible. And wizards don't always have to be presented in a very screen-by-screen approach. We see approach here of using a wizard from Smooch.io. Smooch.io is a messaging solution connecting companies to their customers through platforms like Slack. So fittingly, its onboarding is handled through a Slack bot named SmoochBot. SmoochBot asks the new user a series of questions about their company's goals, their audience type, things that will help it craft a first project for them and a dashboard of tools that reflects their specific needs and their company goals. And at the end of this, not shown here, but SmoochBot will also ask the new user whether they want to contact a live human. So again, kind of weaving in to help and support as part of this. And for a bit of inspiration, I've thrown in an example from a mobile app called Lark, which is a fitness coaching app. It has a very similar take and formatting for its wizard and onboarding experience, conversationally asking a few explicit questions about the user's fitness goals. But it also asks for access to the user's motion data history on their phone. And if the user grants that permission, then Lark can learn from the user's past activity levels, implicitly understanding how much coaching it needs to provide to get them to those fitness goals. So we can learn explicitly about our new users by asking questions, presenting filters, or having them take part in a multi-step wizard. And we can learn implicitly from contexts like location, which we can get from the rough IP address or a more exact HTML5 geolocation API, which requires permission, just be aware of that. Time of day is a great context. You can tailor content relative to known events or daily routines. The referring source is also a good context, so tailoring a landing page based on your entry point, and the device can provide some helpful context, like we saw in that example from Lark. At this point, you now have seen a lot of examples of personal focus and tailoring experiences, and now your team may start generating a lot of ideas for what you want to learn about your new users. And it's your job to make sure you don't replace bombarding users with information with bombarding them with questions. You need to be able to figure out what is the one or maybe the 2 most important things that I really need to know about my new users in order to tailor their experience. And that brings us to the last exercise I'll share that you can do with your teams at home. It's called, What's Your First Question? And all you need to do in this exercise is take each idea that your team has for what they want to learn about your user and put it through a 2-line template. If you knew this one thing you want to learn, what's the most meaningful experience you could provide to the user as a result of it? And you're going to look for the things that give you the most meaningful experiences to weed out the learnings that are superficial. For example, if I am an automotive parts reseller, and if I knew what kind of vehicle my user drives, well, then I can show them parts that fit their vehicle. I could provide an extremely relevant experience. From there, you may need to then figure out the right way to learn the information that you need to learn. You could go back to the coaching cadence exercise to do this, because you can test out whether it feels awkward to ask for this bit of information explicitly, or whether it feels natural to know it implicitly by default. And you can also use this to figure out if you need some follow-up questions. Because the benefit of a personal focus is that each user will get a slightly tailored experience as a result of what you learned, you can also go through and try this out with different personas to anticipate the amount of variation that your experience may need to allow for. The other thing you might notice from taking a personal focus in your onboarding experience, you need to do something with all that other stuff, right? I'm not going to necessarily tell you to remove features or content, but just to find a way to offload them so they aren't all front and center on day one. There are a lot of ways you can do this. You can invest in good help and support sections. You can rely on forums. You can also be creative with your information architecture just to shift things off of one page and allowing people to access them. Or another option here is you could come up with a schedule for distributing helpful information over time as the user uses your product. I have an example here of scheduled onboarding that is used for employees at 18F. 18F is a group of people who work with government agencies to make their services more user-friendly. And all of their new employees on day one are subscribed to this onboarding bot called Dolores Landingham, a Slack bot. This is because all new employees are always talking over Slack. So they figured, let's use that as a way to onboard our new employees. And the reason they chose this was because they had learned from prior onboarding studies with their employees that bombarding them with a checklist of to-dos on day one was just not helpful. It was overwhelming. So they created a schedule to trickle these checklist items out to their new employees during their first few weeks at the company. And so Dolores does that. She gives them a greeting on day one, and then she progressively reveals information for them over their first few weeks. And the reason I share that here is while this is an example of an employee onboarding program, the folks at 18F have made this open source. So this is a great way to prototype a concept of scheduled onboarding for your site. Go ahead and fork the code, and you can try out whether distributing this kind of information proactively to your users may actually be helpful. And this leads us to an important point about personal focus, which is a need for it to persist over time. Don't just go through all that trouble to learn about your new users on day one and then just kind of forget about them later. That'd be a bummer. Right? We want to keep learning about our users from days 30, 60, 90, beyond. Because when you keep leveraging a personal focus, you can do things like point out shortcuts. If after initial onboarding you notice that a user's interacting over and over again with a specific feature, then you can show them a tip for a shortcut for that feature. If you keep leveraging a personal focus, you can communicate change. You'll see what a person's normal workflow is. If you launch a major update to your site that changes that workflow, you can focus that user on just showing them what's changed for them instead of giving them a generic bullet point list of what's new. And when you leverage a personal focus, you can reach lapsing users. You'll identify if they're no longer using your site every day, so you can reach out to them through more appropriate channels. Because when you keep leveraging a personal focus, you are creating a platform for continued education and engagement. All the patterns I showed for guided interaction for free samples, they can be useful at any point in the customer's journey, right? And that's how you sell the concept of investing in good onboarding to your teams. You point out to them that it is not a one-off experience. It's not just something done in the first hour when they're on our site. It's something that you're investing in for their entire journey, so you can keep bringing these elements you've built back again and again to help existing users as you learn more about them. So with guided interaction, we immerse new users into our authentic experience so we can provide guidance and context. With a free sample approach, we build a foundation of trust so that they can use and understand our value proposition before we make them make a commitment. And with a personal focus, we build that platform for continued education and engagement so that we can use all the elements of onboarding throughout a customer's journey. And if there's just one thing that you take away from this session, I want it to be this: that we need to move away from a mode of telling users how to experience our onboarding experiences to a mode of letting them learn for themselves, right? We want to interact and not tell in our onboarding experience. All right, thank you very much. If you have those foam core boards in front of you, just leave them there and I'll pick them up.